برشا فلوس جديدين تتروعش صيف الدنيا وتحسب تونس غير مجوعة تعوش دموع أكبر من الحاجة والنقص.
It's seen as the success story of the Arab uprisings. In 4 years, Tunisia has gone from revolution to reform, a stable democracy in a region blighted by conflict. There may have been bumps along the road, but it's been a relatively peaceful transition, culminating in the first freely elected president in the country's history. So why is Tunisia currently the biggest exporter of foreign fighters in the world, with thousands of young men traveling to Syria and Iraq to fight with the extremists? And what can be done with the hundreds who have returned, who officials describe as a ticking time bomb? We've agreed to hide 24-year-old Khalil's identity. He says he fought with the Islamic State group in Iraq's second city, Mosul. Eventually, he left after being shot in the leg during battle. But Khalil, a communications graduate, was not recruited to be a fighter. He says he was sought out by the group and offered money for a very specific task.
They told me you're doing something focusing on telecommunications, which is your speciality, so nobody can hack our communications. And in case someone is listening in, you would be notified. In terms of their structure, it was very strong. Everything was carefully calculated. Everything was timed precisely. Can you imagine, even if you're going to the battlefield, they would arrange things so a group would fight. And another would pray, and then they would swap. Everything was structured. Even the way they ate was organised. There were even a group of therapists available.
Khalil describes himself as a moderate Muslim and admits he was attracted to join IS because they sounded adventurous. But after 6 months, he started having doubts.
They had sheikhs teaching religion, and I felt their sheikhs spoke a lot about jihad and very little about religion, to the point where they linked everything in Islam to jihad. If you doubted this and talked about the softer side of Islam, then the preachers would admit it, but also say that God has deemed it that the end of the world will be jihad.
The Tunisian government say there are around 1,200 men who have left to fight in Syria, Iraq, and now increasingly Libya. Other organizations say it's more than double that figure. Tunisia has a history of exporting fighters to other countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. But since the toppling of former President Ben Ali's regime in 2011, the numbers have spiraled. The declining economy has certainly contributed to this phenomena, but not all the fighters come from poor backgrounds. What we found speaking to IS defectors and those who still sympathize with the group is that there's a sense of despair and uncertainty about the future that recruiters here have successfully tapped into. The promise of excitement, being part of a cause that they convince you is worthy, and a feeling of belonging to a group that will take care of you are common reasons we've been hearing from fighters here and elsewhere for why they join jihadi groups. Munir is 19 years old, and like hundreds of others here, he was radicalized by Muslim preachers in his neighborhood, despite not being particularly interested or knowledgeable about religion. 7 of his friends have died fighting alongside extremist groups, including IS in Iraq and Syria, over the past 2 years. Munir made a video in their memory. Although he says he's never gone to fight, he admits he and his friends think and talk about it.
There is many reasons. Maybe كلهم يكونوا مبطلين من القراية في عمر صغير. تكوينهم يعني المعرفي في علوم الاجتماع، علوم في السياسة، في أغلب يعني حتى معرفتهم الدينية الأولى تكون طفيفة على الأخرى، خاطر في المدارس ما يقراوناش مسائل معمقة. تقرأ برضاء الوالدين، تقرأ حاجات هكا صور صغيرة من القرآن، ما تقراش مسائل فقهية قد تكون صعيبة لكن قد تبسط. وجيراني وأصحابي كانوا الكل يتعاطوا في المخدرات، إن شاء الله ربي يغفر لهم، يعني نتصورهم تابوا أنا في المرحلة الأخرى. كانوا يتعاطوا في المخدرات، كانوا يبيعوا فيها، كانوا مدمنينها، كانوا عندهم حالات من الإجرام وإن كانت طفيفة، كانوا يتعرضوا للعباد، كانوا يعملوا مشاكل، كانوا يضربوا، كانوا باش ما نقولش، المهم كانوا كما نقولوا احنا ناس متعرضين لكل شيء. يعني ما تستغربش انه يتعرض الشبهه كيف هذه في دينه ولا في انه يكون جهادي ولا حاجه يعني عاديه على الأرض.
It didn't take long for us to find a mosque where the imam was openly preaching about how an Islamic state offers the solution to the daily struggles of all Muslims.
لو تقوم أمة إسلام وترجع دولة إسلام ويرجع الإسلام العزة نتاعو سترون أن الأرض ستتبدل والحياة ستتبدل. أمة الإسلام في حال من الضعف، من التشرذم، من الانقسام، من الوهن. هذه الأمة وأعداؤها تمكنوا فأرادوا إذا نظرت غايتهم ما هي أن القضاء على الإسلام والمسلمين.
Although they are operating less visibly now than in 2012, ultra-conservative or Salafi mosques and associations here actively recruit and traffic young men through a network of intermediaries that facilitate their entry into Syria and Iraq. This man selling perfume and religious pamphlets was listening to a sermon by what he described as an IS imam. He told us he sympathized with the group and the idea of attacking Western countries. After a few minutes of filming, though, some of the worshippers approached us.
Islam will dominate the world.
Moments later, plain-clothed police asked us to stop filming. Once the camera was off, they confiscated the man's CD player and told him to move on. Under the 23-year rule of former President Ben Ali, Islamist movements were persecuted, mosques shut down, and thousands imprisoned. Ben Ali enforced secularism, bringing mosques and imams under state control. Some Tunisians blame the moderate Islamist Ennahda government that took over after Ben Ali was ousted in 2011 for the spike in numbers of foreign fighters. They may not have agreed with the former president's crackdown, but are also weary of the influence hardliners within the Ennahda party are having on Tunisian society. It's inside the mosques where the majority of young men are radicalized and ultimately recruited. The authorities are now trying to replace the imams that encourage extremism, but it's a long process and one that poses a serious dilemma for the Tunisian government. How do they silence these preachers while holding true to the notion of freedom of speech, one of the central tenets of the revolution? Mohammed is the president of an organization that helps families find and bring back their loved ones who have gone to fight with extremist groups. He started the organization after negotiating the release of his disabled brother, who he says was brainwashed by Salafi preachers into joining a jihadi group in Syria.
هنالك اختراق لوزارة الداخلية، هذا شيء أصبحت معروف في تونس. هنالك حد غض النظر إلى حد التواطؤ من بعض السلطات عندما نلقاو اللي نفس الأئمة يعتليوا الجوامع. هنا أين دور وزارة الشؤون الدينية؟ هنا دور وزارة الداخلية؟ أين هي السلطة حاليا؟ يعني في تونس أصبحنا نعترف اللي في أشخاص موجودين في السلطة وهم حرضوا وهم تواطؤوا وإلى يومنا الآن هم لم يحاسبوا.
One imam taking matters into his own hands is Sheikh Farid Beji. He works with the government to identify extremist mosques and preachers. But it's a dangerous job. Extremists have tried to kill Sheikh Farid and he regularly receives death threats. Now he walks around with 2 armed bodyguards. For him, de-radicalization is possible by using the Quran to counter extremist ideology. But he admits it doesn't always work.
نحن لنا يعني دراسة في هذا الجانب كيف نستقطب الشباب من العنف إلى اللا عنف، وهذه لا تكون بكلمة أو كلمتين، وإنما هو بحوار متواصل، ولكن هذا الحوار مع المبتدئين، أما الذين وصلوا إلى مرحلة معينة من تبني هذا الفكر الداعش التكفيري فهم لا يسمعون أحدا.
And the problem may well get worse. Fighters are returning home to Tunisia. A crackdown on so-called extremists in recent weeks has resulted in the arrest of dozens. But with an increase in attacks on the police, some think the government strategy is backfiring.
في تونس هناك ما يقارب 500 تونسي عاد من المحرقة السورية. العائدين هذوما يا إما الأكثرية في الإيقاف يا إما النسبة ضئيلة أحرار. يعني حتى طريقة مجابهة الفكر هذايا والأشخاص هذوما اللي يحملوا أفكار طريقة غير سليمة. عندما نريد استئصال هذا الفكر يجب إعادة تأهيل وإدماج العائدين، يعني وضعهم على حدة. حاليا في تونس العائدين من محرقة سورية نضعوهم مع حق عام، يعني اللي سرق واللي شد على مخدرات إلى آخره، يعني أصبحوا هم في حد ذاتهم يستقطبون في السجناء.
There is no easy fix to Tunisia's radicalization problem, just like there's no one reason for why so many are joining extremist groups. But what's happening today is sure to have repercussions in Tunisia and elsewhere for generations to come. Shireen Tadros, Sky News, Tunis.